I've been in scenarios where the president has been on the phone briefing people within the group that mission's gonna happen. And if you fail, this is America's failing on TV. Some of the highest targets that the world has was executed by some people that I personally know. And if you fail, we fail.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. And however, if you win, you shut up.
You wear a certain mask of command because that's how we're trained. I think that's what's expected. But when you move past that, when you're not in command, sharing the failures, not just the wins and all the sexy firefights and killing bad guys and kicking doors in and all the victories, really getting to a point in your life where you can share those failures with people so they learn those lessons. Because I truly believe this, man, is if you're not willing to share the failures with this younger generation, you've now become part of the problem.
Military is good at conditioning us to serve the role or the job that it needs out of us. Some of us choose the job that we want in the military, and we serve in the capacity that it suits us personally. Some get in a pipeline that ends up in a job that's not ultimately their best contribution, or it doesn't suit their personality. I would say in the transition, take a fresh view, scan the horizon 360.
What do leaders do? They make decisions. Bad leaders can't make decisions. Subordinates can't make decisions. You can say what you want about senior leaders. They're not afraid to make hard decisions.
Meanwhile, rockets, RPGs, we are taking so much gunfire in our perimeter. There are Taliban members running through. This was in Ghazni. There are members of the Taliban running through our base, literally shooting at U.S. soldiers. Yeah.
And you got a call from your wife.
Wife, my phone rang. I said, hello. She said, babe. I said, hey, what's up, mama? She said, your mom just passed. I said, okay, I'll call you later. She was like, all right.
This episode is sponsored by Tiffany & Bosco. High-stakes disputes demand high-impact trial attorneys. Will Fischbach and his trial team at Tiffany & Bosco deliver results for clients in the full spectrum of commercial and business litigation disputes.
Get in the courtroom pretty quickly as an Army JAG. I had my first murder case within 3 months. Iron Triangle, there's an island in this, canal that has bad guys on it. A couple of detainees are rounded up, 3 of them. And the soldiers at some point said, just kill these guys, let's just waste them. The rules of engagement are not a suicide pact. The second you have a reasonable belief that either you or your unit are in danger, you absolutely positively deploy lethal force. The rumor mill starts going that what happened to that family out there at TCP2 was that Army soldiers did it. I want to be the best attorney I can be for my clients, and I also want to be the best leader I can in the community. And those two things are not inconsistent. By virtue of what I do in the community, I'm better able to serve my clients. So, my day job is I'm a litigation partner at a law firm called Tiffany & Bosco. It's almost a little over 50 years old. I'm a trial attorney, meaning I take cases to trial. And I have the military to thank for giving me the breadth of experience to know how to take a case to trial and actually get up in front of a jury and truly try a case. The military, it's paternalistic. Especially if you're a young enlisted soldier, you're told where to live, what to eat, what to wear. Everything is it's a highly structured environment that governs your life when you're basically both on and off the clock. And it has to be that way. That's how you maintain good order and discipline within any unit. But the flip side of that is, once you get that DD 214, and now you have to make all these decisions like, all right, where do I live? What is my job? Do I ask for a raise? Am I making enough money here? Do I look for a job somewhere else? Those are questions I don't know that a lot of younger veterans are well equipped to answer.
And I found this in my, 12, 13 years of entrepreneurship as a full-time entrepreneur, full-time business owner. And I've hired MBAs literally, and I've hired people with no college degree that have 20 years experience. And candidly, I'll take the experienced guy
every time,
10 times out of 10.
Every time.
Did the Army, would you say that really gave you your experience as opposed to maybe a first-year attorney that doesn't have military experience? Hey, nothing wrong with that, but doesn't have that. They have to get experience somewhere. So would you say you kind of, what's the term? You broke your teeth or however that goes in the military?
I can answer that question, yes, unequivocally. The military, and I don't think it's just limited to just attorneys. It gives you an opportunity to, particularly if you're an officer or even a kind of a junior kind of NCO position, an opportunity to kind of assume ownership over what you're doing. But particularly as an attorney, you get in the courtroom pretty quickly as an Army JAG. I think I first started as litigating. I started on the defense side as a defense attorney in the 80s.
You did, or you say in general, you think just as the nature of the position you get into the courtroom?
I think the Army in general, if you want to take the opportunities, will give you probably the best opportunity to not only get in the courtroom right away,
really,
but also on big cases. I was probably a year, maybe year and a half, 2 years in when I first started my first litigation position, which was a defense attorney in the 82nd Airborne Division. And I had my first murder case within 3 months. And typically in your county attorney's office, or your DA's office, you're going to start with the petty crimes, the drug crimes, the property crimes, and then you kind of work your way up to the homicide division. That's kind of like the pinnacle of a career.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, on the JAG side, you can.
Is it because there's more crimes, less attorneys? What's the equation there?
Boy, I don't think it's because there's more crime. I don't think that's the case. If anything, because the military is a very tight-knit community, I think oftentimes it's harder to conceal crimes. I mean, there's so many crimes that just go unsolved. There's murders that aren't solved. I think there are kids that are abused, and it's much harder to get away with that on a military base when everybody lives close together, when they're all talking. There's that aspect of it, but I think it's just the way the Army and the military in general approaches leadership. Is it why the military is so effective at teaching leadership is it puts people in these positions that are kind of sink or swim, for lack of a better term. Now, I often say to my people, look, my job is to basically, I'm not going to tell you how to suck an egg. I'm just here to make sure you don't choke on it. Because there's more value in you, rather than me micromanage you through the process, I'm going to give you a couple pointers, and I'm going to let you figure it out on your own, because you will learn more effectively that way, as opposed to me, dictating every little move that you make. And as long as you don't do anything, that's fatal to the case, or crosses the line ethically, or into malpractice, that's fine. And mistakes are going to happen. Mistakes are, as probably the best way we learn.
I've had a few.
Yeah, I've had a few, and I'm sure I'll make more of them, and I hope to utilize them as the best learning experiences that I can. But going back to your question, why? It's just the way the military looks at leadership. It looks at developing young officers, and then if you go to like a busy installation like a Fort Bragg or a Fort Hood, there's just a lot of God love Joe, but he he has a way of getting into trouble. I'll start off by saying there's a lot more to being a JAG in any branch than just military justice. I mean, there's a whole kind of panoply of disciplines, legal disciplines within each service's JAG corps.
Like, what's an example?
For example, the big one is operational law, the law of war, the Geneva Convention.
Interesting.
How do we interpret the rules of engagement? That's a huge piece of it. Administrative law. I mean, the every military kind of floats on this, is buoyed by this tens of thousands of pages of regulations that have to be navigated. And the commanding general's wife wants to use the division's money to have a tea party or something like that. Or actually, a better example, this actually happened at Fort Campbell. Oprah Winfrey came there and I think gave everybody a car or something. And it was all a bunch of military spouses and service members in the audience. And there was something of a conundrum there, is that, under the Joint Ethics Regulation, which is federal law and governs all federal employees, can they do that?
Can they receive the car?
Right. Yeah. Can Oprah Winfrey show up and just say, I don't remember if it was cars or vacations, but there was some giveaway that everybody got.
Interesting.
And that's when you have administrative lawyers to look at that stuff. Let's say you meet an officer from a foreign country and they give you a gift that has, some kind of extraordinary value. Can you keep it? Things like that. There's things that are just kind of basic, what I would call legal assistance. I mean, soldiers get divorces. They sign they purchase cars at 28% interest. I mean, they do all kinds of things.
Payday loans.
Yeah, they need the assistance of a lawyer to kind of help them get out of it. And then there's the UCMJ part. I moved around Iraq a lot because I was the head prosecutor for the division, but I also was tasked with working with the judges and police in all of our sector, which was basically all of northern Iraq, or at least northeastern Iraq.
Let me clarify, the Iraqi judges and police, the local.
Right.
Police,
Actually, I'm sorry, northwestern Iraq. So I'd fly around a lot for that. Mosul, Tal Afar, occasionally I'd have to go to Baghdad to at one point we had some civil affairs unit up in Mosul that kind of went rogue and they built the bar. And then they were having the privates were going in there, getting into liquor, dancing on the bar, and I had to go down and interview the general in charge of the civil affairs unit and go down to Baghdad and say, sir, what's going on up there? But primarily I was in Cobb-Speicher, which is just outside of Tikrit, Saddam's hometown, and I would sometimes see this, young female lieutenant, tall, brunette, gorgeous.
Yeah.
I'd see her in the mess hall, and I could tell by virtue of her shoulder patch that she was in one of the medical units. So after that, I started coming up with a lot of excuses to hang around the hospital. And ultimately, what happened was there was a case where a bunch of enlisted soldiers got together. I mean, Cobb-Speicher is huge. I mean, it's just this giant, the installation itself was enormous. The cantonment area was relatively small compared to the rest of the base. Somebody found some shack out in the middle of nowhere, and they did hip hop night. And a bunch of soldiers go out there, and one of them got totally wasted. Was driving back from hip hop night.
There's always one.
Well, there's or more. And so he flips the Humvee.
Oh my goodness.
And unfortunately, the passenger is ejected. Passenger's spine is severed.
Oh.
They're both taken to the emergency room there on Cobb-Speicher, where my wife was working that night, my future wife. And she's rendering treatment to both of them. I wind up charging the driver with, obviously, in addition to, kind of the military's version of, aggravated DUI, because he severely injured the passenger, the whole host of things, violating General Order Number 1, et cetera, et cetera. And so I eventually I went into the ER to interview the people that had been there that night, and that's how I finally got my chance to meet her. Was she had been in the ER that night treating those two soldiers, and that was my in, so to speak.
I did read a story, and you correct me on all the details because I will definitely mess it up. But a story where she had to actually treat a combatant,
Right.
and I mean, two things. One, tell me if that falls under law of a Geneva Convention or something of treating combatants, and two, I think that's a testimony to who we are as America. Because
Absolutely.
what other country, what other military would treat their enemy, would spend our resources, our time to try to save your life if you're the enemy?
It's a short list with one name on it, and it's the United States of America.
Wow.
So there's a concept in the law of war called, it's French, it's called hors de combat, which means out of combat. And you know, the best analogy is, you know, either you're in the boxing ring or you're out. And you're out of combat if you're severely wounded to the extent where you're no longer
A threat.
a combatant, really. You know, and in this case, it was actually our first date, so to speak. We were going to go have coffee together, which is to say, we were going to go to some little, you know, ramshackle trailer on Cobb Spiker that served coffee. But so Special Forces had an engagement with a group of insurgents. They had close air support from an Apache attack helicopter, which has that 30 millimeter chain gun on it. The story was that the 30 millimeter had basically just like sheared off the insurgent's right arm, and so, but he doesn't die. I mean, he's somebody puts a tourniquet on him, and they take him to the hospital there on Cobb Spiker, and bring him in, no ID. He's missing his right arm.
So first point I want to bring up.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
Sure.
Somebody had to treat him on the ground.
Right.
Before he even got to the I was going to say FOB, but to the base, somebody had to treat him and provide immediate medical attention to a combatant right there on the ground.
So some Special Forces medic, I mean,
Right.
he's captured, and he's still alive. And some Special Forces medic had to render, triage care on the
Right.
spot, which was probably a tourniquet and
Sure.
fluid and things like that.
Wow.
And then they had to get him, so you stabilize him, and then you get him to the nearest major hospital, which would have been Cobb Spiker.
Wow.
So he gets to Cobb Spiker, and again, he's missing his right arm, so he's got no ID. So they call him Lefty, which is, I get it. In hindsight, maybe bad taste, but Lefty had
Lefty could have been dead. So
well, he lost a lot of blood, and you don't know what his blood type is. So what do? You've got to go into your supply of O negative, which is the universal blood. And Lefty went through every drop of O negative that day. But that's what we had to do, not only legally, but I think, the Army in particular, the military, and U.S. military, I should say, emphasizes the importance of maintaining that moral high ground. And once Lefty was in our care and custody and he wasn't a threat anymore, it was our obligation to stabilize him. And then ultimately we handed him over to the Iraqi forces, and they did whatever they were going to do with him. But that was our job, is to make sure as long as he was in our care and custody, he was somebody we had to look after.
when I've been kind of reading up on the Mahmudiyah rapes and killings, that's a heinous crime to be committed anywhere, let alone by U.S. soldiers at war.
Yeah.
And the way that went down, unprovoked, totally just out of the blue, it seems. How did that go down?
Jeez. Big question. So the Mahmudiyah Massacre was an instance, I think it occurred, I want to say also in March or April of 2005, where members of the 2nd Brigade Combat Team of the 101st Airborne Division, which at the time I think was attached to 4th Infantry Division. They had 4 or 5 soldiers, or 4 soldiers actually, had raped a young Iraqi girl, killed her, killed the parents, set the girl's body on fire to make it seem like it was the result of some kind of sectarian violence. And those of us that served over there know that, if you're kind of you're kind of standard garden variety Iraqi civilian, you were probably much more likely to die at the hands of a fellow Iraqi than you were at the hands of a U.S. service member.
Well, that's one thing Saddam Hussein did, was kept a lid on the
Right.
different sects, religious sects, and all kinds of stuff. And
Right.
when he lost power and we came in, everybody just fled, and you had
Yeah.
villages and this Shia, Sunni, and that was a big problem.
There are divides that go back, and part of it's Shia Sunni, but then within that, superimposed on that, there are tribes, and
Right.
and
Right.
and there was just so much. There were, I think, a lot of scores to settle in a lot of ways. That you're right, because of the way Saddam ran that country, he kind of kept a lid on all of it. But yeah, they set the body on fire of the young girl, hoping it would kind of burn the whole scene down, and then make it seem like the insurgents had that it was kind of one tribe retaliating against another
But
tribe.
this was also clearly premeditated. I mean, these are 6 soldiers manning a checkpoint,
Right.
which even the logistics of that, I mean, was this just like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m.? Did they sleep there? Forget all those details for a second. But these are 6 soldiers where 4 of them, and this is this is in the middle of the city, right? I mean, or along a major road per se.
I wouldn't call it that. So it occurred. So the whole thing went down in, it's actually Lusafia, Iraq. It was called, the AP reporter who reported on the story first said it occurred in Mahmudiyah, which was technically incorrect. I mean, it's kind of like saying something happened in Peoria, Arizona, when it really happened in Glendale. But be that as it may, the name stuck after the AP story ran. But it actually happened in Lusafia. That was all part of an area south of Baghdad, which was a lot of agrarian land. And it was, for those of you who live in Phoenix here, it was something of like a post-apocalyptic Arcadia. It was a lot of palm trees, a lot of canals, and therefore a lot of vegetation, or like bad
Farmland, agriculture.
Well, and also places where bad guys could hide. I mean, if when you have kind of a water table like that in the desert, and you've got drought resistant vegetation, I mean that stuff grows and it grows and it grows. And on top of that, the canals, there weren't a lot of ways to cross the canals, and there was so much just stuff in those canals. You wouldn't want to, you're here, bad guy's there, he takes a few shots at you and then runs. Unless you've got a bridge or another way to cross somewhere in the vicinity, he's probably getting away with it, because you're not going to want to jump in those canals, because God knows what was in there, razor wire.
Sure.
It also could be some kind of ruse, because they've got something daisy chained in there to blow you up. But it was a very frustrating deployment for those soldiers, because it was extremely violent there. That unit, I think, at that time had suffered more casualties than any unit in the entire conflict. They lost their platoon leader, had been quite literally blown up. His body dismembered due to an IED. Two squad leaders had been shot in the face at one of those checkpoints by an Iraqi that everybody thought was kind of a friendly.
That's got to play on the psyche
Right.
of all the other soldiers. Like, you wake up every day, is this going to be my day?
Right. It was just an extremely violent area. And I think the soldiers were out there at these traffic control points, which are kind of along these little highways that go between one little farming hamlet to another. And they're out there pretty much on their own. You're out there, maybe 6 or 7 junior enlisted soldiers and a squad leader. This particular area was called TCP2, or Traffic Control Point 2. And at the time, the squad leader was on leave. And so you had a very junior soldier in charge by the name of Paul Cortez, who at the time was an E4 specialist. I think he was promotable to be sergeant, but he hadn't pinned yet. And So squad leader's gone, and then you've got a guy in the unit named Stephen Green, who is, by all accounts, was just a grade A sociopath. He got into the Army on a moral waiver, meaning he should never have been there in the first place, but like it or not, this was a time when the Army needed bodies, and it certainly needed bodies in the infantry. And so he got on in a moral waiver, and he was just, everybody regarded him as kind of a loose cannon, a lunatic. He would say the craziest things. He had, we'd heard stories about him throwing puppies off a roof and just doing kind of just really vile, sadistic things. Squad leaders, he's on leave. You've got a junior soldier in the form of Cortez in charge. You've got Green there, the sociopath. And on top of that, the soldiers had somehow managed to get some whiskey from the Iraqis. So they're sitting there at this traffic control point. They're like playing cards. And, going back to soldiers and, soldiers sitting around a table drinking whiskey and playing cards, they tend to say some pretty crazy and outlandish things. I mean, that's what 20, 25-year-old kids do at that point. And at some point, somebody had said, hey, that girl that lives at that farmhouse over there, what if we were to go over there and rape her? And I think initially the reaction, and I'm kind of telling this narrative after I'm constructing it, having digested the case and all the statements and everything. Somebody had thrown that out there, and I think initially, probably the initial reaction was, well, that's silly. Let's not do that. But the day wears on, more whiskey's consumed. This is a unit that's really been through hell. Again, no leadership on the spot to stop them from doing this. And I think what started as kind of just a juvenile suggestion morphed into a plan. How would we do this? What would we do? We'd probably put on we take off our uniforms, we put on our thermals, cover our faces so we look like we're local bad guys. How would we do it? How would we get there? Well, if we kind of cut through, this area, there's like a chain link fence there. You cut through that chain link fence and cut this way across that field and go that way. And pretty soon, this just idea became a plan. And so Green, Cortez, two other soldiers named Barker and Spielman head to this farmhouse where this young girl named Abir lived.
I'm shocked he actually got the other soldier to agree with him and go through with this.
Again,
crazy.
Had the squad leader been there, it never would have happened. Had there not been whiskey, that never would have happened, But it was kind of people have often said to me, like, well, these guys had to have been, well, clearly they all had something wrong with them in the sense that their moral compasses were severely lacking. But I just, there was kind of a confluence of events there, the alcohol, the absence of leadership, just the fact, I think, that they were all very bitter about, they felt like that they had been abandoned by their own chain of command. And I'm not saying that was a fair or accurate belief on their part, but that was their perception.
Got it.
So they go to the farmhouse. At the time, the husband and wife are there, as well as the young girl, Abir, as well as her 9-year-old sister. Green, they go in the house, kind of corral the family in there. Most Iraqis had an AK-47 in the house as kind of
Protection.
Self-protection.
You were allowed one, I think,
Right.
or whatever it was.
It was for home defense. Green finds the AK-47. He uses that to shoot I believe the mother. But Green also took a shotgun with him. In hindsight, that was probably the one thing that ultimately tipped us off that it wasn't Iraqis that did this, because Iraqis they never used shotguns. That was something that U.S. forces typically had for breaching and things like that. And so Green shot the father in the head with the shotgun that he had taken from TCP2. And if you've ever seen a shotgun wound to the head, it looks a lot different than a AK shot to the head. I mean, the father's head was just well, it wasn't a head anymore. It was, it was, a piece of bone with a giant hole in it with, brain and blood coming out of it. And I can, to this day, I can envision those photographs. So he kills the parents, puts them in the bedroom, kills them, also shoots the 9-year-old sister in the face, which is the worst. Well, I shouldn't say that, but it just, that, again, to this day, the photographs are just kind of burned in my brain. But shot her through the eye and went out the back of her head. And then they took a beer, the 14-year-old girl, into kind of the living room, so to speak. And then they Cortez, Green, and Barker took turns raping her. After which Green took the AK, shot her in the head, and then I think they had there was oil there that they used to keep their lamps on at night. They covered her body in that, set it on fire, hoping it would kind of consume the entire building, and it didn't. It really just wound up burning half of her body. And then they head back to TCP2. Ultimately, there were 2 young boys that were part of the family that were at school that day, come home, see their house on fire. They go to their uncle who lives down the street. He comes there, puts the fire out, gets some water from a well, I think, puts the fire out, and then goes to the Iraqi army and says, "It's 4 dead people here." That then prompts the Iraqi army, then calls another checkpoint, TCP1 down the road, and some soldiers there go to TCP2 and do what you might call a QRF or something like that. And so Spielman and Cortez wind up going back to the scene as part of the QRF to investigate this. And the other folks there don't even know that they had just been there a couple hours before. So as with the prior case, they all get together and say, we shall never speak of this again. And that lasts all of about, 10 minutes. And eventually kind of the rumor mill starts going that what happened to that family out there at TCP2 was that Army soldiers did it.
So at first it was stamped as this was sectarian violence, Iraq on Iraq violence.
Yeah. And
there was no real launch of an investigation or anything like that.
Yeah, it was just kind of written off as just like, and to be fair, the sectarian violence in that country was really awful.
Sure.
I mean, the things that Iraqis would do to other Iraqis was incredibly brutal. Mm-hmm. But it was, I don't think I'd ever heard of an instance where they burned bodies before. That was, at least that was something typically reserved for infidels like you and I. But you'd never heard of Iraqis doing that to another Iraqi. That also was kind of odd. And then also at the scene, they found not only was there an obvious shotgun wound to the head for the father there, but they found a shotgun shell, a spent shotgun shell, which, because Cortez had gone back to the scene, he collected it, and that later disappeared and never, made its way into the kind of evidence. So
Interesting.
Interesting. But eventually, people started talking about it, and a young soldier by the name of Justin Watt kind of started. He was like, "This can't be okay," and he started asking questions and kind of piecing together what had happened, and he brought it to CID, which again, Army detectives, and said, "This is what I'm hearing happened," and that was a really tough thing for him to do, because again, he's an infantry soldier, close to unit, and these are literally his brothers, and for him to do what he did again was not easy. Meanwhile, Green is being out-processed from the Army because of, shocker, antisocial personality disorder.
Sure.
So as all of this is coming to light in Iraq, Green is back at Fort Campbell. He's getting ready to get his honorable discharge and become a civilian. So I think Green probably was out with his DD 214 discharge certificate probably a week or two before we conclusively had our arms wrapped around this investigation and what had happened. there's a whole body. And people say, well, why didn't you charge Green? Well, there's a whole body of law about the military's jurisdiction over service members. Obviously, if you're on active duty, they have jurisdiction over you. But there's also instances where soldiers know they're about to get charged with something, and so they find a way to get that DD 214 and hustle out of there.
And you had charged anybody at that point?
Not yet. We were getting ready to, and we knew where Spielman, Cortez, Barker was.
And real quick, your role on this was the lead prosecutor?
Correct. But for Green to still be under military jurisdiction, well, let's just say that to be detached from military jurisdiction entirely, you have to have three things: a DD 214 discharge certificate. You have to have what's called basically an out processing, where those of us that have been there know you go around and somebody stamps your piece of paper and you spend 2 days going to every little office on the base, and then finally you have to have what's called a final accounting of pay and allowances. As it turned out, the Department of Defense still owed Green 66 cents due to an accounting error, and so technically did not have a final accounting of pay and allowances. Did I want to hang my hat jurisdictionally on 66 cents for what would likely be a capital murder case? I did not. Fortunately, a new law had been passed called the MJA, the Military Extraterritorial Judicial Act, which allowed the U.S. Attorney to charge, among other things, people that had committed crimes overseas while on active duty, but had since left active duty status.
Which brings that they could be prosecuted back under UCMJ?
No, prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney in the federal criminal courts. In this case, I think it was the Eastern District of Kentucky. But for that law, Green would have never been charged.
So this law states if you conducted a crime while on active duty military, you are now no longer part of active duty. You could still be brought up on charges.
Right.
Whereas prior to that, like me as an example, if they came to me prior to this law and I'm out now, they couldn't charge me with anything if I conducted a crime?
Yeah, they could now.
They could now, but prior to the law,
Right,
if you
correct.
committed a crime while you were scot-free if you got out.
Correct. That was actually kind of a secondary purpose of the MJA. The primary purpose was really to be able to charge civilians that were accompanying U.S. forces overseas. And the catalyst for all of it was a case in Germany where there was a civilian employee, Department of Defense employee, who worked for the post office there, had molested his daughter in an apartment off base in Munich or some German city somewhere. And the German authorities were like, look, it's an American on American crime. We don't care. He's your problem.
Jeez.
But there was no way to prosecute him in U.S. courts. So the MJA was largely a response to that.
What does it stand for again?
Military Extraterritorial Judicial Act. And it doesn't really so much create, it doesn't expand the jurisdiction so much of U.S. courts as it almost created a new crime under federal law, which says if you do something that's an existing crime under federal law, but you happen to do it overseas, either as a member of the armed forces or as a civilian that comes to the armed forces, you've now committed a crime.
All right, so the three other soldiers are still in.
Barker, Cortez, and Spielman. I prosecuted the three of them, as well as a couple other people that were involved, but really didn't have a significant role.
Green, the culprit or the mastermind, he's out, but because of this MJA, he could still be tried.
Right.
But he has to get another prosecutor, or can you still prosecute him?
No, so he was prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney, I think, for the Eastern District of Kentucky. I was sworn in as a special assistant U.S. Attorney to assist in that process, but I didn't try the case. My job was to get Barker, Spielman, and Cortez convicted, and also get them in a position where they could then be used as witnesses against me.
And what were you what was the charges?
Homicide and rape, primarily. So although Green was the trigger person, anytime you either aid and abet somebody in a crime or conspire with somebody to commit a crime, you're just as guilty of the crime. So again, you and I we're gonna rob a bank. You actually go in the bank. I stay outside as the getaway driver. I'm still guilty of bank robbery.
I didn't know that.
Likewise, because the other soldiers aided and abetted with Green to kill the family, they were equally guilty of homicide. There's also a concept called felony murder, which is if a murder happens to occur during the course of a felony, of another felony like a burglary or something like that, that's murder.
Interesting.
And then there was the obvious one, which was rape, which Barker and Cortez did actually commit rape. The theory with Spielman was that he had aided it and abetted the entire process.
Did Barker and Cortez admit to that, right?
Well, they made incriminating statements to CID. Eventually, Barker pled guilty. Cortez pled guilty to some things, but not others, and we tried him and got a conviction. Spielman did not. He pled guilty to some minor things, but did not plead guilty to the big ones. We tried him and got a conviction there. But ultimately, the goal was to make sure that we could have all of them ready to testify against Green. Green goes to trial. I can't remember what year it was, probably 2008, 2009. The U.S. attorney goes for the death penalty. They did not get it, which didn't shock me in the least. And I can tell you why, because I had been sworn in as a special U.S. attorney, I get to participate in the grand jury proceedings. And as any good lawyer will tell you, those proceedings are secret, and I can't talk about what was said there. But what I can say is I watched the faces of the grand jurors as they heard the testimony. And I could tell that they were partially disgusted by what happened, but maybe even more disgusted by the conditions, the harsh conditions that the soldiers were facing there. And I knew at the time that Green was probably not going to get the death penalty.